Let's begin the lie. You still believe. 10. Napoleon was a tiny little dictator with a massive ego. He's become the go-to insult for short guys with big attitudes. They even call it the Napoleon complex. But here's the twist. The truth. He was average height. Napoleon Bonaparte was about 5 feet 6 inches to 5 feet 7 inches, roughly 1.68 meters. A completely normal height for a Frenchman in the early 1800s. So where did the short Napoleon story come from? British propaganda. During the Napoleonic Wars, the British were desperate to humiliate their biggest enemy, Napoleon. So they started mocking him as a little man with delusions of grandeur. Think of it as the 1800s version of political memes. Measurement confusion. French records listed Napoleon's height as 5 feet 2 inches, but in French inches, which are longer than English ones. When translated to modern measurements, it's actually closer to 5 feet 6 inches or 5 feet 7 inches. He was often surrounded by tall guards. Napoleon had an elite bodyguard unit, and many of them were over 6 feet tall. Naturally, he looked smaller by comparison, like a regular guy standing next to NBA players. 9. Vikings wore horned helmets. Every Viking ever? Big beard, axe in one hand, horned helmet on his head. It's the Halloween costume, the cartoon image, the Thor movie stereotype. But it's also completely wrong. The truth. Vikings never wore horned helmets. There is zero archaeological evidence that real Viking warriors ever wore horned helmets into battle. Not one. No graves, no relics, no carvings, nothing. In fact, wearing horns into combat would have been impractical, easy to grab, heavy to balance, and useless for protection. So, where did this myth come from? 19th century opera and theater. The horned helmet image became iconic in 1876 when costume designer Karl Emil Doppler created them for a production of Wagner's opera Der Ring des Nibelungen. That opera wasn't trying to be historically accurate. It was going for drama, fantasy, and flair. But that image stuck. Romanticized art painters and sculptors in the 1800s wanted Vikings to look mythical, not historical. So they added horns, wings, and the flair, feeding the fantasy. Pop culture repetition cartoons, comic books, Hollywood movies, all ran with it. And soon, everyone knew Vikings had horns, even though real Vikings would have laughed or rated at the idea. 8. Einstein failed math. You've probably heard it as proof that it's okay to struggle in school. Even geniuses do. But that's a complete myth. The truth. Einstein was actually gifted in math. By age 12, he was already mastering algebra and calculus. By 15, he had a grasp of differential equations, far beyond his peers. So where did the myth come from? Swiss grading confusion. When Einstein transferred schools, the Swiss system used 6 as the highest score. In Germany, 6 was the lowest. Someone saw a 4 and assumed he was failing. But in Switzerland, 4 was a passing mark. A misquote gone viral. In a 1935 Ripley's Believe It or Not feature, it falsely claimed, "Greatest living mathematician failed mathematics." Einstein later said, "I never failed in mathematics. Before I was 15, I had mastered differential and integral calculus." 7. The Great Wall of China is visible from space. It's one of the most repeated facts in classrooms, trivia nights, and textbooks. But it's completely false. The truth. You cannot see the Great Wall with the naked eye from space, let alone from the moon. Astronauts have confirmed it, including those on the International Space Station. Why? Because the wall is too narrow, about 30 feet wide, and made of materials that blend with the landscape. From orbit, it looks like part of the ground, not a sharp, clear structure. Where did the myth come from? Early assumptions. The myth appeared as early as the 18th century, long before we even reached space. People assumed a structure that long must be visible from afar, without understanding optics or orbital distance. Textbooks and pop culture. The lie was repeated so often it became common knowledge. It even made its way into school books, tourist brochures, and press reports. NASA had to correct it. Multiple astronauts, including Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei, said they couldn't see the wall from space. NASA later confirmed, the Great Wall is not visible from space without aid. 6. People in the Middle Ages believed the Earth was flat. We're told that Columbus had to prove the world was round, or he'd sail off the edge. But that's not just wrong. It's lazy history. The truth. By the Middle Ages, educated people already knew the Earth was round. In fact, Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and Aristotle argued for a spherical Earth as early as the 6th century BC. Even sailors, astronomers, and scholars in medieval Europe accepted it. They just disagreed on how big the Earth was. Where did the myth come from? 19th century fiction writers. The idea of a flat Earth belief was exaggerated in books and essays to make the Middle Ages seem ignorant and backwards. Writers like Washington Irving dramatized Columbus's story to create tension. Even though no serious scholar opposed his voyage on flat Earth grounds. Modern bias, Enlightenment thinkers and later historians wanted to paint the church and medieval era as anti-science. So they spread the idea that everyone was clueless, to make themselves look smarter. It's a straw man argument. Saying people believed the Earth was flat became a way to insult old ideas, even when it wasn't true. 5. Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." When told the peasants had no bread, Queen Marie Antoinette supposedly shrugged and said, "Let them eat cake." It's quoted as the ultimate symbol of royal arrogance and indifference, but she never said it. The truth. There's no historical record of Marie Antoinette ever saying those words. In fact, the phrase existed decades before she was even queen. It first appeared in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's Confessions, written when Marie Antoinette was still a child. He mentioned a great princess who said it, with no names. Later, during the French Revolution, that quote was pinned to her as propaganda to stir rage. Why was it believable? She was an easy target. Marie Antoinette was foreign, Austrian, stylish, and seen as out of touch with the suffering poor. So revolutionaries used her as the face of royal excess. It made good storytelling. The idea of a rich queen mocking starving peasants was too juicy for critics to resist, even if it wasn't true. Repetition became history. Newspapers, pamphlets, and textbooks kept repeating the phrase. Over time, myth replaced fact. 4. Columbus discovered America in 1942. That's the line everyone memorized in school. But it's wildly inaccurate and leaves out a lot of truth. The truth. Columbus never set foot on what is today the United States. His voyages took him to the Caribbean islands, parts of Central America and South America, but not the North American mainland. And more importantly, he didn't discover anything. Millions of indigenous people already lived across the Americas, with rich cultures, cities, and civilizations. Who actually got there first? Indigenous peoples. Native American civilizations, from the Iroquois to the Mayans, had lived on the continent for thousands of years. Leif Erikson, the Viking. A Norse explorer, Leif Erikson, reached what is now Canada, Vinland, around the year 1000 AD, nearly 500 years before Columbus. Columbus didn't even know where he was. He died believing he'd reached Asia, not a new world. Why this myth spread? Eurocentric history. European writers and textbooks focused on who discovered it for Europe, not who was already there. Colonial justification. The myth of discovery helped justify colonization and conquest. Because you can't steal something you found. Hero worship in schools. Columbus was mythologized as a fearless pioneer, not as a man whose arrival also led to slavery, disease, and genocide. 3. Chameleons change color to camouflage. Sounds cool, sounds believable, sounds wrong. The truth. Chameleons don't change color primarily for camouflage. Instead, they do it to communicate with other chameleons, e.g., to show dominance or attract a mate. Regulate their body temperature. Dark colors absorb more heat, light colors reflect it. Camouflage is a secondary side effect, not the main reason. How does it actually work? Chameleons have specialized skin cells called iridophores, which contain nanocrystals. These crystals reflect light differently depending on how tight or loose the cells are arranged, kind of like adjusting a prism. That's how they produce colors like blue, green, yellow, even pink, not just dull browns and greens. It's more like biological mood lighting than a cloaking device. Why the myth exists. Cartoons and pop culture, from the magic school bus to animated movies, chameleons are always shown vanishing into the background. Misinterpreted nature shows. People see color changes and assume it's to hide, but the context is often social or thermal. The word camouflage sells it sounds mysterious and tactical, like a reptilian ninja. Nature is smarter and weirder than the myths we tell. Chameleons don't hide by changing color. They express themselves. They flirt. They threaten. They sunbathe. Their color is not just a disguise. It's a message. 2. The Salem witches were burned at the stake. It's the image most people carry. Terrified women tied to stakes, flames rising, screaming crowds watching. But that never happened in Salem. The truth. No one was burned at the stake during the Salem witch trials of 1692. Instead, 19 people were hanged, and one man was crushed to death with stones. Burning was a punishment used in Europe, not in the American colonies. So, where did the burning idea come from? European witch hunts. In places like Germany, Scotland, and France, accused witches were often burned publicly as heretics. Over 40,000 people were executed this way during the European witch craze, but not in Salem. Hollywood and horror tropes. Movies, books, and TV shows often blend the entire history of witch trials into one dramatic, fiery spectacle. The result? Confused timelines and false visuals. Burned at the stake. Sounds more dramatic. Let's be honest, hanging doesn't have the same horror movie ring to it. So the phrase sticks, even when it's historically inaccurate. What really happened in Salem? Accusations started with young girls claiming to be bewitched. Fear, religious extremism, and superstition spiraled into mass paranoia. Trials were held. Spectral evidence, invisible spirits, dreams, was allowed in court. 20 people died, most of them completely innocent. It was a social panic, not a medieval bonfire. The real tragedy of Salem isn't how people died. It's why they died. Mass fear, mob thinking, no evidence, no mercy. The true horror wasn't fire. It was justice gone blind. 1. George Washington had wooden teeth. The lie, America's first president had dentures made of wood. It's one of the most repeated fun facts in U.S. history books, but it's completely false. The truth: George Washington had terrible dental problems, but none of his dentures were made of wood. Instead, they were crafted from a mix of human teeth, often purchased from enslaved people, ivory, from elephants or hippos, metal, like lead, gold, or brass. Over time, these materials would stain, crack, and discolor, giving them a grainy brownish look that resembled aged wood. That's where the myth likely started. Why did he need dentures? By the time he was president, Washington had only one real tooth left. He suffered from frequent dental infections, abscesses, and painful procedures, all without modern anesthesia. He wore multiple sets of dentures during his life, which were uncomfortable and often made his mouth swell. That's why his portraits show a stiff, tight-lipped expression. He was likely hiding pain. Why the myth spread? Stained dentures looked wooden. Discolored ivory looked wooden to observers unfamiliar with the materials. It made him seem more humble. The wooden teeth story made Washington appear more relatable, like a simple, rugged leader who endured hardship. Textbooks simplified it. Instead of saying ivory and human teeth, it was easier and less disturbing to just say wood. That's all for today. Hope you enjoys the video. You might not see my channel again. That's why you have to smash the subscribe button so you don't miss out on interesting episodes we bring to you every day. Thank you. See you in the next one.